Well, hello and welcome to Sipz and Stories. My name is Elizabeth, and in today's video, I will be taking you on a tour of Edinburgh, Scotland. I came here for one reason and one reason only, and that was to visit their iconic bookstores. When you get here, you'll notice right away that this is a very literary city. In fact, I do believe UNESCO did designate Edinburgh as the literary city capital of the world. And for good reason. Not only is it aesthetically pleasing with the castle in the background and the water and the mountains, but it is also home to a lot of really cozy and amazing bookstores that I can't wait to share with you today. So grab your favorite beverage as I discuss Edinburgh's bookstores. So again, I absolutely love this city. It's like someone designed a city just for me. It's got the mountains, the water, the castle, and all these really cool bookstores. It also has amazing food, a lot of young people that are going to the University of Edinburgh, and it just is a great place to mix, mingle, and be. I love the bookstores here, especially since they are so charming and cozy. When you visit the bookstores in Edinburgh, it's a lot like going into someone's home. And these stores are tiny, so they have a very curated selection of books. And a lot of them have the exact same taste as me. A lot of classics, a lot of modern contemporary authors, especially female authors, and just a lot of unique and special books. I love the bookstores here, and this is fast becoming one of my favorite cities in the world. I was first inspired to visit Edinburgh after watching Jean's Bookish Thoughts, her 2 videos about Edinburgh. I thought she did a terrific job of breaking up the city into the bookstores that were in Old Town and New Town. They really inspired me to come here, so I will link her videos below. She is also an author herself and an Edinburgh native. I love her channel, and I really love her children's books for kids as well. Like Jean, I'll start out in New Town and then I will talk about some things to do in Old Town, just so you don't end up walking from one side of town to the other like I did to make this video. The first bookstore that I'd love to share with you is actually my favorite bookstore here in Edinburgh, and that was Typewriter Books. This is in New Town. It's right down the street from the famous Princes Street and the St. James Shopping Center, which is home to some really fabulous shopping and dining if you're in the area. And it is also close to Edinburgh's iconic Topping & Co. bookstore. I love this place simply because of the bookseller T. I just fell in love with T and his bookstore Typewriter. He's an amazing person, and we just had the best chat when I visited his shop. He is a really fantastic bookseller. He did work at Shakespeare & Company. He was also giving me recommendations of bookstores in Madrid. I loved him, and the shop is really unique and special because T is the only person in Edinburgh, or probably the entire UK, that can fix old typewriters. So there are all these typewriters all over the shop, and I do think that is why the shop is famous. He also makes these little origami creatures out of book pages, which I just thought was a unique touch, and this is the reason that I did go to the bookshop. I don't want to think about how T is doing this. Obviously, he is ripping up old books to do this. Shame on him, but it is a really special touch, and he did give me a bat in honor of October and Halloween. The other unique thing about Typewriter, and this is what I think a lot of Instagrammers are missing, is that it is right next door to a classic bookstore here in Edinburgh, and that is McNaughtons Bookshop. McNaughtons was started in the 1950s by a retired Army major. Him and his wife started McNaughtons, and they are famous for collecting collectible books and antique books. And I have to be honest, I do love McNaughtons, like maybe a little bit more because I love classic books, and they just had the most amazing selection of folio books. So while you're there, T will tell you the whole history of McNaughtons and Typewriter. The space that Typewriter is in was actually the gallery space for McNaughtons. Typewriter selection is just a nice curated selection of classics, of modern books, both fiction and nonfiction, and I just do think T, because he worked at some of these iconic bookstores like Shakespeare & Company in Paris, I just do think he has a really great taste in books. And again, this is just a really fantastic bookish place to be in Edinburgh. The atmosphere there, because McNaughtons is the classic bookshop and has all those classic folios, and then T has all the modern books, it's just really great bookish atmosphere in there. So what did I pick up at Typewriter? The book that I picked up was The Sandcastle by Iris Murdoch, and I've wanted to read some Iris Murdoch for a long time. She is a very famous female author. She wrote most of her books in the 1950s. I do think she kind of has that like cynical style. She does sound a lot like Muriel Spark, so I am looking forward to reading this. And again, I just love that cover. I have to admit, I bought it because I love the cover, but it does sound very interesting. It is about a man that is having an affair and kind of leaves his family and just the repercussions of that. And so I'd like to see how a female author approaches that subject, especially since her protagonist is a man. Another special thing that T does is he does give you the Typewriter stamp on the title page of the book, and if you are a fan of Shakespeare and Company, you know why he does that, and I just love him. I love the way his bookish mind works. So what did I buy at McNaughtons? Well, I knew I was going to buy a classic book, and all their books, I have to say, for being really beautiful editions, especially those folios, they were very reasonable prices for the folios. So I wish I had a whole suitcase to take those folios home, because I probably would have bought a lot more at McNaughtons if I could have. I did end up buying this very vintage copy of The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I also thought it was interesting because if you are familiar with The Mayor of Casterbridge, it is about a man that leaves his family. So I thought that was interesting that I picked this up alongside of The Sandcastle by Iris Murdoch, because even though they were written decades apart and almost a century apart, they are about a very similar theme. So I think it would be interesting to read these two books together. And I'm so happy that I bought them at Typewriter and McNaughtons, which should be your very first stop on your bookish tour of Edinburgh. So after you leave Typewriter, you can just walk down the street to get to this next iconic bookstore. And in fact, this is the one that Edinburgh is famous for, and that is Topping and Company, of course. Topping and Company is another chain here in the UK, but I think this Edinburgh location is probably their most famous location, probably because the aesthetics of the outside with that circular exterior. Also, the inside is lovely. It's floor to ceiling books, and it just feels like being in someone's house where every single room in their house is full of books. So it's just a wonderful experience. I love it in there. Another unique thing that they do is they do wrap their books, especially their hardback books, in that library plastic wrap. I've never seen a bookshop do that, so I thought that was a really unique touch that Toppings does. And it is really nice if you are buying hardback books or collectible books like I do, that they do take the time to wrap them in that plastic wrap. I just thought that was a really classy touch that Toppings does. Another special thing that Toppings does is they have a lot of signed copies of books, and that again is just another unique thing that a lot of these iconic bookstores like Blackwell's and Waterstones and Toppings will do. It's just a unique thing to these UK bookstores, and the one that I bought was The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa. Excuse me for mispronouncing his name. I've seen this book all over London, all over Edinburgh, and so when I saw that Toppings had a signed copy of it, I was really excited, and I knew I was gonna buy it at last. I bought it just because of that cover alone. It sounds adorable and very charming. I love Japanese writing. If it's not crazy like Murakami, it's usually very cozy and charming, and that's what I'm hoping this book is like. Also, because the author is Japanese, he did sign the book in his native language with the Japanese characters, which I thought was really special. There's also a really neat stamp in there as well. I just cannot wait to read this book, and I'm so happy that I got this signed copy at Topping and Company. Another book that I bought there was A Place Like Home by Rosamunde Pilcher. I love Rosamunde Pilcher. She is one of my all-time favorite authors, and although she is not Scottish herself, she did live in Scotland for years with her husband, I believe in Dundee, and a lot of her books like Coming Home and September and The Shell Seekers, a lot of them, especially September, are set in Scotland. So I most credit Rosamunde Pilcher for making me want to come here and explore this really cozy and very charming place. So I knew I had to buy one of her books. And this book, A Place Like Home, is a collection of short stories by Rosamunde Pilcher. So while you're in Newtown, you are really close to the Prince's Street. In fact, I am staying right by there and it is fabulous. You have these iconic views of Edinburgh Castle, and Prince's Street Park is just a really great place to walk around, get a cup of coffee. They also have a very nice Waterstones, and you guys know how much I love Waterstones. Again, I do think people in the UK take Waterstones for granted. I wish that Barnes & Noble was like Waterstones. I love the one in Piccadilly, but the one here in Edinburgh is really special as well, just because it overlooks Edinburgh Castle, so you can sit in the coffee shop and just kind of have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and just sit there and stare at the castle away from all the tourists that are down on the street. They also have a really nice curated selection of books by Scottish authors or that are set in Scotland, especially in the children's department. I really liked those books that were set in Scotland that were in the children's department. Love this Waterstones. It's impossible for me to not buy something at Waterstones, so I picked up Sylvia Townsend Warner's Lolly Willowes. It's about a single woman named Lolly Willowes who gets fed up with her life in London and ends up moving to the countryside to kind of live her own life, to follow the beat of her own drummer. She gets accused of being a witch, and she does love animals and nature, and it kind of takes a dark turn, I've heard, but I am loving it so far. I love Sylvia Townsend Warner's writing. It is just exquisite writing, so I'm fully anticipate giving this book 5 out of 5 stars, and so happy that I got this copy at Waterstones. The next neighborhood you're going to want to visit in the Newtown area is, of course, Stockbridge. I really love this side of town. In fact, I am finding myself gravitating towards Stockbridge a lot on this trip, simply because they just have the best food, the best coffee, the best shopping there. There's a really nice grocery store there. I just really like it, and it does feel like you are getting away from the tourists on the Royal Mile and Prince's Street, and that you are experiencing a little more of the local life here in Edinburgh. Stockbridge, of course, is home to some really great bookstores as well, including a very famous one called Golden Hair Books. I loved Golden Hair Books. This is the one, again, that most reminded me of like going into someone's house. It was so tiny, but the bookseller there, the store manager, she couldn't have been any nicer. She had a really nice curated selection of books, just very unusual books that I've never heard of before. I could have bought out her entire store, but the children's department, everyone said, was really special there, and I have to agree. So if you are looking for some really special picture books or children's books, I do recommend Golden Hair the most for children's books. And that's what I got there, of course. I got a middle grade novel while I was away by Waka T. Brown. And this is kind of a coming of age story that is loosely based on Waka's life growing up as a second generation Japanese immigrant in America. Her family sends her home to Japan to live with her grandmother and kind of experience Japan. And she kind of gets homesick going to school in Japan. She really misses America. She misses her family. So I am really looking forward to this, and I'm so happy that I picked it up at Golden Hair Books. Another really lovely independent bookstore in the Stockbridge area is called Rare Bird Bookshop, and I really love this one, a lot more than I thought I was going to. It's gaining quite a reputation on BookTube, Bookstagram, Book Talk, simply because it is a bookshop that is dedicated all to female writers, and a lot of Instagrammers love this bookstore because it is so colorful. The bookshelves are all sorts of colors. It smells so good in there. That's the first thing I noticed when I walked in, is that it just smelled really good in there, which is why it surprised me, because when they said it was a feminist bookstore, I thought it was gonna be very granola, like Portland or Seattle. It wasn't political. It was just dedicated to women authors, which I loved. So they had everything in there, from Jane Austen to Virginia Woolf to Zadie Smith to Margaret Atwood, and then a lot of female authors that I have never heard of before. So it was just a really nice bookshop to browse. Their store manager, again, could not have been any nicer. She, again, was fine with me filming in there, and we just had a really nice discussion. They also had these really nice, like, date with a book books, and I like the way that they wrapped their books, their Date with a Book books. This one is called Under the Radar Book. So if this wrapping gives you any indication of what it was like at Rare Bird Books, I think you will see that it is just very colorful, very feminine, very just nice. That was the vibe I got in there, is that it was not granola, it was very just classy and nice in there. So I like the way that they wrapped the book. There's like a postcard that has the gingham wrapping paper. Some of them were pink, some of them were yellow and green, but of course I got this one that was purple and Under the Radar Book. And I think all these books were about $8.99, so £8.99 or around $10 US. So let's see what book I picked up at Rare Bird Books. And this is Outlawed by Anna North. And so this is supposed to be like The Handmaid's Tale and The Crucible. I'm also noticing in the corner the Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and Reese Witherspoon does tend to pick really good books. So I'm really happy that I picked this up, and I'm sure I'll probably get to it at some point. I'm especially happy that I visited Rare Bird's bookshop. It was just a terrific bookstore. One of my favorites here in Edinburgh. Another surprising thing about the Stockbridge area, and in fact all of Edinburgh, is they just have a really nice selection of charity shops, or thrift stores as we call them in the US, and they're really nice, guys. I'm noticing that the charity shops here in Edinburgh are just a lot cleaner, they're really well organized, and I just had a great time browsing all of these charity shops that were in the Stockbridge area. And so of course I picked up some great books. And this charity bookshop was probably my favorite. It was called Shelter Scotland. So I left the price tag on it so you could see that I bought this folio edition for only £8. I was so happy to get a folio at a thrift store. That just made my day because I love folios so much, and I'm so used to just buying them online. So to see this just kind of sitting there willy-nilly at a charity shop was so much fun. And it was only £8, guys. That's about $10 US. So a folio for $10, how cool is that? And this one, I've never heard of it before, but it does sound really good. It's called Loving by Henry Green. I just was attracted to that peacock on the cover, and I do think I have browsed this one on eBay. I did look up the synopsis, and it is about a group of servants in Ireland shortly after World War II. It's supposed to be very cynical. I do think it was also the inspiration for Julian Fellowes and Gosford Park, which, as you know, was the precursor to Downton Abbey. Gosford Park is a lot meaner than Downton Abbey, and I've heard this book, Loving, is actually a lot meaner than Gosford Park. So not sure I'm gonna love it, but I'm so happy that I picked this up at a charity store. Another book that I picked up at the charity shops was this UK edition of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And as much as I love Harry Potter, I don't own a UK edition, so I thought it was really cool that I got this here in Edinburgh, where the book was conceived and a lot of the book was written. And when you're in the city, you do get a lot of Harry Potter vibes, I won't lie. It's a really fun place to be if you are a Potterhead like I am. And this UK cover is so cool. It's just really different than the Scholastic cover that I'm used to. I love Dumbledore on the back and how his beard is kind of tucked into his belt. This is so cool because I know that a lot of British people probably grew up with these editions, where I grew up with the Scholastic editions. Really happy to have this in my collection now. Alrighty, now that we have explored Newtown's bookshops, and again, I barely scratched the surface of all the local bookstores that are in the area. They're all over the place. Let's make our way up to Old Town. Old Town is really nice. Of course, it is home to Edinburgh Castle and Edinburgh University. It's a really fun side of town, and of course they have a lot of great bookish things to do there and a lot of nice bookstores. The first one that I visited was Armchair Books, and again, this is another iconic bookstore here in Edinburgh. I have to admit though that it was probably my least favorite bookstore on this trip. I just heard so many great things about it, and I just think the hype was more than the bookshop itself. The main reason I didn't love it as much as I thought I would was that it was just really, really small and very difficult to browse in there. And because it was right off of Grassmarket, it just had a ton of tourists in there. I just could not wait to get out of there, quite frankly. And that is my pet peeve as a book lover, is that when I really want to browse a bookstore and there are just tourists in there that are pushing me and not even buying books, I just cannot wait to get out of there. But on the plus side, I do have to say that they just really did have a nice selection of used books. So you might want to go back like really, really early in the day or later in the day if you want to avoid the tourists. It also had one of the best book smells that I've ever smelled in any bookstore, if that's your thing. Very geeky, I know, but the book smell in there, that very musty, damp book smell, was really, really good in Armchair Books, if that's your thing. So I ended up picking up this book and hightailing it out of there, and that is Small Island by Andrea Levy. This is another one that has been on my TBR for a long time. It's about two couples shortly after World War II. One couple is black and the other couple is white, and it's just about their experiences in London after World War II, especially since the men just got back from the front. And so what it's like for these two couples based on their race in London after the war. I find that fascinating. It's supposed to be really good. It's gotten a lot of positive reviews. So happy that I picked up this copy at Armchair Books. Some more bookish things to do in Old Town are, of course, Edinburgh's Central Library. I do recommend taking a stop there if you are a literature lover like I am. The Treasures Room is very similar to the Treasures Room at the British Library. Not as extensive, of course, but still worth a visit to see some letters by Robert Burns and Sir Walter Scott, some really cool editions of Harry Potter from all over the world. I thought that was a nice exhibit. And then they do have a Gutenberg Bible in there as well, and I never pass up an opportunity to see a Gutenberg. While I was there, the library also had this exhibit dedicated to pen names, which I thought was a lot of fun. They talked about some of my favorite authors like George Eliot and like Josephine Tay. So I do recommend that if you are in the area currently in Edinburgh, to stop off and see that exhibit at the Central Library. Another fun bookish place to visit is the Writers' Museum. And the Writers' Museum is absolutely adorable. Like most of the museums in Edinburgh, it is completely free. However, it is really small, really pokey, and it has these wraparound staircases that are very, very tight. So if you are visiting with older relatives and friends, I just be aware of that because it's very difficult to walk up those staircases. Even for me, I bumped my head a couple times. It was worth it though, because they do have a lot of artifacts dedicated to some very famous classic authors from Edinburgh, including the most famous Sir Walter Scott, of course, who wrote Ivanhoe and Waverley and The Lady of the Lake. That was really cool to see some of his personal letters and papers. They also had an exhibit dedicated to Robert Burns, the famous poet. And then my favorite Edinburgh native would probably be Robert Louis Stevenson, who is the author, of course, of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Treasure Island. So I love him. I love Long John Silver, probably one of my favorite characters in literature. I was really excited to see some of his personal effects and then also pick up this Children's Garden of Verses at the Museum Bookshop. I've been wanting to read this forever, and I just thought this was a really nice edition of it, and so happy that I picked it up at the Writers' Museum. And the final kind of literary thing to do in Edinburgh, and you just gotta make sure you do not leave without visiting this graveyard, and that is Kirk Friars Graveyard in Old Town. This was kind of my first stop when I first got to town, and I went there not to see all the J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter names like Tom Riddle, but to see this guy, Greyfriars Bobby. So this is a book by Eleanor Atkinson, and so this is an interesting history because Greyfriars Bobby apparently was this little terrier dog that when his owner died, he stayed in the graveyard on his owner's gravestone for 14 years. And so the whole town of Edinburgh Edinburgh kind of adopted this little dog, and he just kind of became the stuff of legend. Well, shortly after that, an American by the name of Eleanor Atkinson, she wrote this very famous children's book, Greyfriars Bobby. And so I do think the Scottish people probably have a love-hate relationship with this book, because it is a very famous children's book, but it was written by an American, and Eleanor Atkinson never came to Scotland. So I don't know, she must have been a historian or something, because having read this right now in Edinburgh, she gets a lot of the details right and correct about all the geography. So I have to say, this is a charming story. It is well worth a read. She is a terrific writer and author, and I do think this is just a children's classic that everyone should read about this little dog and old Jock. The real story is, I do believe that old Jock was a policeman in real life, so not an old farmer like he is depicted in the book. But again, this is a must read if you have kids, and this belongs in every child's library. So there you have it. Thank you for joining me on my bookshop tour of Edinburgh. I love this city. I've fallen in love with this city, the people, the places, the castle, but most importantly, I love the bookstores here. They are so charming and cozy, and the booksellers themselves cannot be any more friendlier. I especially love T at Typewriter. He is now my favorite bookseller in the entire world. Love him, love his store. I love the history of Typewriter and McNaughtons. So make sure you visit his shop on your next visit to Edinburgh. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.